Hey, Danielle, how you doing today?
Yeah, good Reed. How are you?
Oh, doing pretty well. I'm enjoying my Friday, and I know it's a Saturday morning for you.
It is 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning in New Zealand.
And I want to thank you and appreciate you getting up early to come on again. I'm happy to have both of you on, and also it's going to be, I think, a pretty fun topic today.
Yeah, I hope so. It's one I really like. Certainly worth getting up for.
Exactly. Somebody just commented it's a Charticulator, which is the DAX of visuals, which is an interesting analogy. But in general, just like I love the
Yeah,
tool. I think it's as creative as the artist on who's using the canvas, so to speak. But it's something that we talked about before, and certainly um, since that last time that you've been on, even we didn't know about it. Like, for people tuning in, like we're both MVPs, and in general, we have the privilege of kind of being in the know-how with Microsoft, and usually have a pretty good understanding, good understanding of what's coming out in the pipeline. And all of a sudden, one day, a little bit before it actually went out in a public preview, we just got an email within the MVP thread that just said, "Oh, by the way, we're releasing a custom visual in Power BI." That's basically Charticulator that normally you design in the web, but you can design it directly in Power BI. But the best part about that is you can immediately, as you'll see in a bit, you can use the data that's directly from the model. So you don't have to make like a custom file and upload it. So the integration is amazing. But it was a big surprise for everyone. And as soon as that happened, I think I pinged Daniel within like a day or so of seeing that, like, all right, we got to immediately like talk about this again because this is really cool. And I think for the time from us learning about it to public release was only 3 or 4 weeks. It was pretty quick.
it it was really really fast. So it was
Yeah.
awesome. Very very fast.
Yep.
And as someone who develops visuals inside Power BI, it's a huge feat that they even did it, which is amazing. But yeah, no, it was just like, oh my god, the possibilities. And going back to what you
Hmm.
just said, like Charticulator is like the DAX of visuals. Wait till you start mashing up with DAX. That's when it
Exactly.
gets interesting.
Yep. And
But
there's a couple that we even talked about this week. I threw that article from Chris Dutton that was on that he made it like a little multi-card thing in Excel, but that's actually probably the thing that I've been trying to and wanting to explore more and more with Articulator. This year is most of my custom visuals that I make in Power BI when it comes to layering are usually like combo card type things where you want to make like a single looking visual that's usually a combination of a few different elements to create like a custom card layout with usually a few different metrics. Typically, it's usually a total with some variances, maybe some KPI coloring, and possibly some trends. But often that's like 5 or 6 different visuals that you have to make. And Charticulator is a great
yep,
candidate for that. It's the visual count optimization, where you're trying to reduce the number of unique visuals on a page. And even though a custom visual does run a little bit slower than a native visual, one custom visual will definitely render faster than 5 combined native visuals, hands down. So it's a no-brainer with that. And I think that's I'm going to continually probably go back to my video archive and try to see how many of the ones that I used to build by layering, like, and basically just turn that into a custom visual that I can have directly in um, using Charticulator.
yep, definitely. I think if you've got the option, it's a really good use case. And yeah, you kind of when we were getting ready for this session, you talked to me about Chris's example. And I thought, oh, I haven't tried one like this before. So it was a pretty good learning exercise for me as
Yep.
well. We'll show you what I'm kind of ideally looking to focus on today, because we've talked about Charticulator very very recently.
Hmm.
So we did a session well just before they announced the visual. So we should be fairly fresh in our minds. Obviously, a lot more people are aware of it now. We are going to try and focus more on building on what we did last time.
Yep.
But what I'd like to do is, because the temptation with Charticulator is to start building like circular bar charts and all kinds of weird esoteric visuals, which is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in how, like your scenario, Reed, where you've got a
Hmm.
real need to layer visuals or reduce the amount of visuals on screen, or produce something really, really bespoke. So I'm focusing today
Exactly.
on how we can enrich our visuals using some good data viz principles rather than focus on something weird and wacky and out there. Once
Hmm.
we get those building blocks in place, then you can start going creative, I think. What I'm looking to do today is, because we can only cover so much in an hour or so, it's just giving you some awareness of how you can start using Power BI plus Charticulator more intelligently rather than building it in the web and importing it and testing and retesting and that kind of thing. So that's one of the most exciting things is the feedback loop as well, plus the DAX,
Yes.
plus possibilities. So yeah, that's what we're hopefully going to do.
And I'm going to add it in right now, but I'll just say for people watching this, if you haven't seen the first one, I'm going to edit the description, and in a minute or so, there will be the link to the first live stream that I did with Daniel earlier this year down in there. For people who haven't watched it, do you want to just give a little bit of background about yourself and who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I am Daniel. I am a MVP based down in New Zealand, in Canterbury on the South Island. So typically what I do, I mean, I've been working with Power BI since, I don't know, a long, long time. Before it was the full Power BI we see today, so back when it was in Excel. What I've got really interested in over the last few years is the visual layer. So I got pretty late into custom visuals compared to others, so maybe about 2018, mainly out of my need to expand my palette. And back then, custom visuals were probably the only really super powerful option we had. And I've released a couple of visuals. So I started with one that did small multiples, but Microsoft have finally got that in, and it's native and really good. So I can put that one out to pasture. The violin plot was another one I did, which is a statistical visual for plotting distribution. Rather than a box and whisker, it shows you the distribution as well. And then last year, the often used HTML viewer visual disappeared. So one weekend I just thought, I wonder if I can do this. So we've put out one called HTML content, which builds on that one and adds more functionality. So and I got a bit of a bug from that one for building visuals that let people get more creative inside Power BI. So naturally, I loved Charticulator when it came out because that helped me build visuals with less code. And I've been working on a visual recently that's similar to Charticulator, but a little bit more, slightly lower level with a few more options, but at the cost of having to roll your sleeves a bit more. That's called Deneb. But that's generally where I'm looking at these days, is helping people to build their own visuals more flexibly at the cost of a little bit more complexity, but some more control over what you can do. So that's I'm quite excited that we're getting these options in Power BI now. So this is kind of where I'm focusing my time.
Yeah, and
hopefully that inspires more creative people than me to produce awesome stuff.
And honestly, I'll probably have 100% have you back on a third time, even to also show your custom visual creator, Deneb, because like that. That's going in a lot of routes where and as I think you've described it, it's trying to make it even more accessible than Charticulator in some ways, and provide even other features that allows for easier and more intuitive builds of a lot of scenarios for either bespoke visuals or ones that are just very practical for in my case, combining elements like that. So that's something I would love to also get demoed as well. But
I'd love to. Obviously, I'm invested in it. I'm not really selling it because I'm doing it for free, but I think it's more of an option. And we've got a chart on the when we start sharing the screen. I've got a little visual that we'll run through. We did this last time, but just as part of a recap. But it's more. Think of it as more like an R or a Python visual. So it's more of a you use JSON, which is a data structure, rather than a programming language. But it's using a language to construct charts, much like Charticulator does, just without the UI. So UIs tend to constrain us a little bit. So my goal is to try and fill a gap between, building a full-on custom visual yourself, which has its own challenges, and be able to click and drag and drop things around. So it's like, we'll see it in a second.
Exactly. But yeah, I think overall you basically swim in the custom design and visual world. I know I've appreciated you rebuilding the HTML content viewer, especially because it's great for so many different scenarios, and including just beyond just imaging now for years, like various types of web content, which has been really, really helpful. So I'm glad that somebody took up that mantle after Microsoft made it disappear. Every once in a while they make a custom visual, like the long text viewer was a really nice one at one point as well that I actually used for multiple things, and that kind of poofed and disappeared, and then people were passing around the last version of the file with each other because you couldn't get it online, and it was coveted. Like, hey, who has a copy of the PBI Viz file? Who can extract it from a report that already has it? Because you can't download it online anymore.
The custom visuals black market.
Pretty much. But yeah, if you want, I can go ahead and flip over. I see you got the kind of the landing page up, so I can switch over to that screen.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, we've already done the intro, so I'll just jump straight into it. So yeah, and we're not going to focus too much on what is a Charticulator, but we'll do a little bit just ahead so that if some people haven't seen the session, they'll have an idea and then they can catch up later, hopefully. So if we think about a spectrum in terms of what we want to do in Power BI, this is a very crude visual. It's built in Charticulator as well, funnily enough. But if we look at Power BI as a service, we can sort of think we've got the core visuals which fall into this clicky, draggy, droppy, which I've got to thank Christian Wade for that. I think everyone's using that these days.
Yeah.
And all the way over here where we're writing full code, and we've got this little blue line here, which I sort of regard as about 25 to 30% along this line, where we've got some options where we don't have to start writing code or do too much. So I normally use bookmarks for this, but I'm kind of doing it crudely today. Assuming my keyboard's going to start working. Oh yeah, there it is. So one of our options is if we exhaust the core visuals, we have the option of going to App Source to look for custom visuals, or have someone develop a custom visual for us, or either way install one and cherry pick it. And this is how we used to do things in Charticulator. We would build visuals in the tool, we would import them, and they're consumable within the report. Now we've got this visual. No, I've got to remember my percentages. Considering I rehearsed this is terrible.
There you go.
Charticulator sort of falls just on the right side of the line where we're not having to write any code, but we're starting to have to get more advanced with how we think about visualization in Power BI. So when we think, core visuals, custom visuals that you consume are predefined charts of a certain type with certain capabilities and certain features. So you are constrained by how Microsoft wishes to deliver the core visuals, or how an author such as myself or others want to deliver a custom visual. And then if you have requirements or properties, then you have to wait for them to be developed, or talk to the vendor, or hope they give you some features, or in the case of people like yourself, Reed, and Kane, who you've had on, there's maybe an option here for things like calculation groups or other DAX workarounds to try and bend things to your will. So what's quite exciting is now that Charticulator is here, we don't have, if we can stay within the Power BI data model, we know how to use DAX, and we're not afraid to roll up our sleeves, we can do a bit of work in this tool to give us some more functionality. Once we get over the line, we've got a tool like Deneb, which we just talked about, and HTML content. These are visuals, and there are others. I'm skewing to myself. There's plenty of other visuals in the marketplace. There's PureViz, which is probably a bit more over here. But it's more about visuals that keep us away from having to learn how to write code, but we still have the ability to move things around and get a bit more lower level. And conversely, then we've got the R and Python visuals, where we're having to we've got the ability to access other languages that we may be familiar with and start to leverage libraries and tools there that we can load into Power BI with, and they have limitations, but it's another option. And then finally, all the way down the end, we can start learning to develop. And obviously, if we, this is where people like myself develop visuals to produce, these kind of things that help other people stay up this end. So this is kind of what we're looking at. But let's just put this on here. So when we talk about Charticulator, which is what we're focusing on today, we can now get it from App Source. It's directly in Power BI. So before, we used to have to go to charticulator.com, where we went to in our last session. We have to launch the tool. We would, when it comes up, because of course it's on a go slow.
The Murphy's Law of demoing,
it's
right?
Murphy's Law. Here it is. Yeah. We'd have to fire it up. We'd have to design our chart in here. We'd have to export it and load it into Power BI. But now we can get it right in there. So how would we do that? Well, for those of you that aren't familiar, in Power BI, we have the visualizations pane. And I have it loaded, but we have the option to get more visuals. We can do it from the ellipsis here, or we can do it from the home screen and click on more visuals. And we get the App Source store. And in here, we can search for Charticulator.
Yes.
And sure enough, we've got the visual. Yep, there it is. So, we can click on its listing. We can have a quick look at it. But typically, the add button is what we want to do. So we click the add button, and that's going to turn up in our report. And then we'll get this lovely little icon here, which is what we're going to focus on today. So in terms of how it works, this is where you've got to start thinking differently. So we can't spend a huge amount of time today on the basics, but I thought I'd give us a few minutes just to talk about some of the concepts. So, as we said, with visuals, you choose them from a palette with a preconceived idea in mind of what you need. With Charticulator, you may have this idea as well, but you're building a chart from building blocks. We call those marks. So let's add the visual to the canvas. And of course, it's going to put it right over the top of my text. So we get this lovely splash screen here. And basically, the gist of it is we need to add data to our visual. And then we need to use the editor, which we'll just do in a sec. So for me to get started, I'm just going to add a simple measure. So I've just got a sales measure here. And now there's a slight change to the visual, and I'm going to turn the title off as well because it does that auto title thing, which I'm not entirely fun about. But the key thing we've got here is we can start editing. So in the visual header, not all visuals have this, but we've got this option to go into what's called the advanced editor. So if you've used visuals like Infographic Designer or even Power Kpi Matrix or things like that, we've got this option. So let's click edit. And now what we've got here is the visual goes into full screen mode, and we've got a new interface. So what it's worth pointing out, just while we're here, hopefully my laser pointer's come up. A visual in Power BI is limited to this sort of box here. So think of it as a walled garden. Visuals don't have the ability to reach into the main window. So everything within the Charticulator interface has to sit within this confine here. So we've got the fields pane and the visualizations pane, and we add fields to the visual, but then we've got this area here to work with it. So one of the first challenges with using it in Power BI is you can reduce your screen real estate as much as possible. That's going to help you a lot. There are some features in the tool that help you if things get crowded, which we may well get into today. If you have a 4K monitor or reduce the font size, it gets quite handy. But anyway, I digress. So right now we've got the data bucket has a sales measure in, and that's just going to be a single value, much like having a card visual. You're just going to have a single sales amount. We also have the option to add links. So it has data-driven links, which we won't do. We didn't do it last time. We won't do it today, just because it's got its own modeling challenges, and that's more of another thing. We can also add custom tooltip fields in here as well. We're going to stay away from these two today and just focus on this one. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, and the stuff I'm going to show you is all done with just adding data.
Yep.
So we've got a couple of options before we start. We've got the option to create a chart or import a template. So if you create a template in the tool, there's the ability to save it. You have to copy paste to a file because visuals aren't allowed to export data. Hopefully that may change. But right now there's an export function that you can copy paste, which we won't again do, but once you've saved it, you can actually import it, or you can import templates that others have made. But the one we want here is create chart. So let's click on create chart. And here we get the user interface. So you know what I said about before? Everything's within this box. So we've got fields and fields and fields. Can't really avoid that, unfortunately, because we can't drag a field into here because the visual doesn't know what it's happening. It's not allowed to talk to the main window. So generally when I've added my fields, I'll minimize these down. I'm just going to keep it open for a sec. But anyway, we have our measure. What we can do, though, which is quite handy, is peep at the data set. So this little ellipsis at the top here, we can actually see that we've got one row and it's a sales measure. So this is the raw value of our sales. So we've got one row, one column. So this is an important concept to master, this granularity. Much like data modeling, what you put into the visual dictates the data set, and that's quite important. So the first thing we talked about was what's called a mark. So marks are here in the top screen. And a mark is a basic element. We use it to do stuff. So if I get a mark here and I draw it on the canvas, I've got a rectangle. And now I've got a rectangle. I'm just going to collapse this down here for a sec. It's called shape 1. Now, shapes have attributes, and we can do things. So what Charticulator focuses on is the ability to assign, you can manually type in a width and set that. Or we can have what are called data-driven attributes. And this is how you might do what we call in visualization pre-attentive attributes. So things that draw your attention to data. So for instance, with a bar chart, it's the width or the height of the bar. That's something that you use to determine the value of a measure. So what I can do here is I can, this is not going to be that impressive. If I drag in the sales, it binds to the width. And if I do the same thing with the height, Charticulator adjusts it. The thing is, this is on what we call the canvas, so it doesn't really do anything. It's just out on its own. Think about just drawing a shape in PowerPoint. It doesn't really have any meaning. So the next thing we think about, I'll just delete that off, is the concept of a glyph. So a glyph represents a row of data, or specifically, this is the template for a row of data. So this is the designer, and in our data set, we have one field. So instead of dragging a mark onto the canvas, I could drag a mark onto the glyph. And now we've got this square in a box, and it's bound all the way around the sides. So instead, what I could do is the nice thing about glyphs is they can contain many marks. So yep. I can drag a piece of text, I can drag a text mark on, and now I've got a text and a box. And I could say, for instance, drag the sales value to text, and now I've got a somewhat unwieldy number. And I can bump the font up a bit.
Basically so turning it into a card at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, that's not exciting, but it's baby steps. It's baby steps.
Exactly.
So let's reiterate. We have one square. We have one row of data. Yep. So this is when we, if we start to add in, let's go to demographic and we'll add in country, short. So I've taken when you get data in Power BI, there's a sample data set. I've modeled the basic financial data just so that we've got something to play with. It's not huge, but it's okay. So we can see now that we have 5 shapes on the canvas. And just for a second, I'm going to hide this text just so that we don't get distracted by it. So now you see we have one glyph, but we have 5 shapes. Now 5 shapes, 5 rows. So what we think about is everything we put in produces a glyph on the canvas. Yep. And this is what we have to think about. Before the basic block is, we use marks to build elements, and glyphs are how our data is bound. We can have many marks. So that's one of the key concepts we want to think about. And we can spend hours just on this whole area because it's the basic. But we've got stuff to show you that's a little more impressive than this. So the next thing we need to think about is what's called a guide. So guides are used for positioning marks or glyphs. And hopefully it shows up, but if I hover the mouse here, we've got these little dotted areas that I can adjust on the outside of the chart. So I could use this here to reduce the margin, for instance, and you can see that my rectangles grow to fit. And guides don't get exported, but they're used to help you snap things. So if we click on, let's do it on the glyph. So you see the glyph has guides. If I click on the rectangle to select it, I've got these 3, 4 even, because there's 4 corners, these solid green dots. And what this means is if they're solid, they're bound to a guide. So that the glyph has these predefined guides as well. So what I can do is I could drag this down, and you see it goes orange, which means it's going to bind to this middle one. And you see now it reduces down to use half the space because that's how it's anchored. Now, if I change this canvas size and reduce it so there's heaps of white space, you see this stretches and reduces the canvas here, what we call a plot segment, which we'll talk about in a second. It's still using half the space. We can drag it across here, and it uses a quarter of the whole space. So this is how we start to use guides to do things. Now, if we go back to that text, and we'll enable it, but what we'll do is we'll move country there so that we can identify each shape. You see, this is bound to the middle. I could just as easily move it to the top, move it to the bottom, and swap it around so it sticks in the bottom there, or even in the middle of where I place it. So you can start to, start to prescribe. That's not a clever idea. We'll just put that back. Where things can be in relative to other things. So what we've got here is a square, essentially, with a value of our row in it, but we can now start to see where things are. So that's a very simple intro to marks, glyphs, and guides. The next thing is what we call a plot segment. So the chart by default has one plot segment, and this is what lays out glyphs. So right now it's got a layout of stack X. We can just as easily change this to stack Y, and that's going to turn it on its side. we've got heaps of other options. We can change it to grid. We can change it to packing. So we start to use the plot overlap, which is totally useless here because it just stacks everything over the top. But you can do some very complicated things with layers and transparencies and various other things. We'll put this back to stack Y. So this just gives us a very simple way of arranging things. And right now, this is bound to Power BI. So when we put the data in, we've got our country and our sales. So one of the cool things about Power BI now in Charticulator is in Charticulator, you'd import your CSV file and it would be the order in which the CSV came in. Mm-hmm. Because with Power BI, you can change how your data set sorts. I could sort it by sales. And instead now, USA, Canada, Mexico, France, Germany. Now this is pretty meaningless. So what we'll do is we'll go back and use that trick of these pre-attentive attributes. So let's click on shape. And what we'll do is we'll drag sales and put it on the width.
There we go. Mm-hmm.
And now we can see, there you go, USA's got higher sales. And this is more like a bar chart now. Higher sales at the top. And, you know, let's go back to that guide. Oops. That's one of the fun parts about when you using a presentation level screen is that it doesn't always behave how you want. There we go. So I can snap that to the bottom. And if I just change the alignment, that's inside the bar again now. So I've now got a way of identifying the bar. It's all aligned to the left. And I'll just set the margin to 0 there because that's what I want. There we go.
There we go.
And we've got a nice simple bar chart. And this is kind of how we start to build things up.
Yep.
Now this is prescribed by Power BI. What we also have the ability to do is do what's called a scaffold. So a scaffold, at the minute, you see we've got an option here of, this is like the stack X and the stack Y. What this lets us do is to define a layout that doesn't disrupt that sort that we just saw in Power BI. So it just lets you prescribe a layout. Now with a scaffold, the most interesting one that people go for is this one here. So let's drag it on, and we've now got a polar chart that's not really easy to read. But now you can start to do, you get different options. You've got stack radial, stack angular, grid, packing. You can start to do some incredibly esoteric things. I would encourage you to use that judiciously because you can produce some good radial visuals, but you know, we can't cover that ground today. So this is the way of keeping our data ordered as Power BI passes it in, which is probably more intuitive for the user. There are sometimes you can't avoid that. So what we need to do sometimes is specify how data is bound to, you know, this is what we call a two-dimensional plot segment. We've got an X and Y axis. So there are occasions where we may wish to bind the X or Y to a data attribute. So let's have a look. If we get country and we'll drag it over to the Y axis here, this now swaps it so that it is bound to the order of the data. And now, even though I've told Power BI to sort this by sales, the axis is now sorted by country. And now Charticulator is doing the sorting for us. So this is one thing you've got to think about. It's always tempting. One of the first things somebody might do is go, oh, I want country on the Y-axis and I want sales on the X-axis. Well, what happens with this is if we just think, oh yeah, this is just a simple XY chart, this is not what we want. And the reason being is that this is the positioning of the glyph. It's not the, it doesn't intelligently move the end of the bar to where you want it to be. It's actually setting the positioning of the value, the shape. So let's have a look at, you know, if we were to drag on, let's just hide this one and drag on a little dot here, you can see that it's actually putting the dot relative to the value. So this is one thing that we need to sort of, it's a temptation we need to avoid. We'll do a bit more about this during the session. So if it doesn't make sense, it hopefully will. But one thing that's quite handy is if you wanted an axis or you wanted some kind of dynamic binding, there's a special kind of mark called a data axis, which you could drag on to the glyph.
Yes.
And if you wanted to make that happen, you know, if you wanted to show the sales amount, you could drag that onto here, onto what's called the data axis. And we now see that it's quite hard to show. Let me just put my little zoomer on because unfortunately Zoom It doesn't work for me. But you should be able to see that there's this little AVG sales, which is this little blue thing. And that's a data bound point there. So one of the first things is with a bar chart, don't start an axis that isn't at 0. That's naughty.
Honestly, almost I would say that like as a best practice with almost any visual in general, be very careful of ever having a greater than or less than zero starting point for an axis.
Yes, I mean there's exceptions like there is for
Oh,
everything, but generally
sure.
with a bar chart, the
Yeah.
rule of thumb is it's pretty much immutable. Do not do that.
Unless you're presenting it for like CNN or news, where then of course you always want to have an axis that does not start at zero.
If you wish to push a particular point, it's always a good way of
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
Um, so what we can do now is we talked about guides. We can drag the guide to this little line here, and now don't worry about the positioning of this. We can sort all that out, and this is just happened because of where it comes in, but. We've now got an axis with a value. So we're not, we can spend a bit of time actually sorting this out and putting it in the right place, but this is just to get you familiar. So we've got scaffolds and we've got axes. So this is the basic gist of Charticulator. We'll cover a bit more off, but this is the kind of stuff that we're going to focus on.
And I got a
So
couple
I'm going to jump
of
at it.
yeah, and once you do that, I got a couple of good questions queued up. So one that was brought up by
Fire away.
Mustafa from Mustafa earlier. So kind of a two-parter to this. Conditionally formatted line chart in Power BI. So I've done something similar to this before. There's the hack with the native visual. You start with a column chart, conditional format, flip it. You get KPI dots that show up onto there. I've also there are other tools online that allow you to like actually have a color gradient on the line. So instead of just going like having dots, but the actual line will have a transitional color as it moves up and down. I don't believe you can do that in Charticulator. That was, I think, one way that I read this, and he also followed up additionally with another question to mention that one other thing that would be interesting is to be able to, based on a condition, some kind of a conditional format, to have it go from like solid to dotted to dashed or something like this else in the line. So, but I think the answer, unfortunately, for both of those is no. But maybe you can prove me wrong.
The answer for both of those is, as often is the answer, it depends.
Yeah.
So one of the great things is, and you'll see this, so I won't spend too much time on it now, is that you can bind measures to attributes, but not all of them. So, and because of how lines work in Charticulator, you actually have more options than you might do if you were to just draw a single line. So we're going to cover how lines are done in a minute. So what we'll do, can we circle back to that one?
Yep, absolutely.
Just hopefully, Mustafa, you'll see some things that will give you some ideas. We can't answer everything, but I'm going to show you some stuff that might give you the little spark you need.
Okay.
The dotted one, I'm not sure about.
I got two others that I think might be just kind of quick yay or nays. So I've not tried this before, but is it possible to create like a calendar canvas? So I'm guessing some kind of just like a calendar custom visual, which I do know there are some in the visual store that are like calendar tables. So I'm not sure if for Steve, if you've explored those yet. There are a few that do have like the clickable kind of calendar type elements and pages and all that. But I'm not sure the complexity to make that in Charticulator or not, or if it's even possible.
I think I might not be speaking. I might be speaking for Steve here, but I see a lot of this online on Reddit and the community forums of Power BI is that a lot of the calendar visuals don't they're useful, but they don't always satisfy the requirements of people have very specific requirements for calendars, and this is exactly what we talked about before, where you need someone. If someone's building a visual for you, you're kind of at their mercy, which is why Charticulator is so handy. Now, what I will tell you is I can't show you how to build a calendar today, but if you think about how some of the stuff we're going to show you today and how you can apply it to Charticulator, you should be able to do it. Because that grid layout we just saw, you can actually bind attributes. So you could think about having days and weeks and group glyphs and marks based on days and weeks, and you can have a grid layout, and then you could put items in there. When it gets difficult is when you've got a varying amount of elements per mark. That's when it gets tricky, particularly at the moment. But what I would encourage you to do is start and see. That's how I would start to approach it.
Perfect. Good answer to that. And go ahead.
These are the kinds of questions that will detour me immensely from what I'm setting out to do, because that's like, oh, can we do that? I don't know. I'm confident that you can do a lot of it, but it depends what you want to put in the boxes, I would say. If you may have multiple appointments per day, that could get tricky. We'd have to have a look at that. But we've got enough things to show you today, which hopefully get the cogs turning.
Exactly. And there's
Okay.
a comment that I'll actually drop in. I have one more question, and then there's a comment that I'll drop in later from Ragnar about a really interesting custom visual that he was asking if you could demo today. I mentioned that we already have some set up ones, but it's probably one that more than likely you'll see that, as you just mentioned, like, ooh, actually, I'm going to go try to see if I can make that later. So I'll make sure to pass that message on to you. But very last quick question. I think this is more of a functionality thing. Are there any plans to kind of allow scrolling? I'm not actually trying to make a visual that has that, but I'm assuming we're thinking of the native visual that has the scroll bar option if there's too many categories and stuff. So I'm not sure if that's something that
it currently doesn't scroll.
Okay.
That's the one thing you have to think about. At the moment, I don't know if there's a plan to change it. One of the nice things about Charticulator is because it's currently open source. So, we were just in the web app. If I just go back, currently, I say it's open source because it was incubated over a little while from Microsoft Research. They have a GitHub repository, and you can raise issues and make feature requests. So I generally spend a bit of time in here giving the team feedback, and I have actually contributed to the tool as well, which is quite cool. I don't know if that's going to keep being the case because as things get more broader and appeal to more users, it's much harder to manage that. And that's one of the reasons that back when custom visuals became a thing, they said, hey, all the visuals are open source now, so you can learn how these are built. But they got too hard for Microsoft to support, so eventually that stopped. And also they moved away a little bit from, you can still do more stuff in here than you can in these ones. But you sort of get the idea. So you can see what changes are happening in Charticulator through the GitHub repository, and the web app updates more frequently than the visual. We haven't seen any updates since public preview went live. What I'm hoping is that they're going to wait for a good time and release them, because there's some really cool stuff that has gone in that would be very handy for some things. Anyway, I think currently scrolling isn't a thing. So I'm actually going to show you a visual that you're probably going to go, ugh, that can't scroll. But this is a use case for a short, sharp, dashboardy type scenario. So if we're ready, are we good to move on, Reed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm just going to take a little journey, and I wasn't going to do this, but I read, I'm just going to do a plug actually, because this book here, The Big Picture by Steve Wexler, is amazing. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. And
I might have to add that to my book list.
It's so good. It's not too thick. It's got lots of nice charts in it, but what's important is that when you're trying to get into data visualization principles, when you're building charts in tools like this, and you're not having a chart built for you, the options are just you don't know where the lines are. So what Steve's done is, and he's worked with people in the community, and there's a great example in there by a guy called Nick Snap, who's one of the people to watch with Charticulator, by the way, where he breaks down some of the more complex ideas of how visuals should work in a much more easily and accessible way. So I saw this amazing example, and I kind of had a light bulb moment. I'm like, oh, I've got to try this. So we'll take you on a little journey as to why you might choose Charticulator over a core visual. So we have,
and I just want to pass one quick comment that you're talking about all the kind of the things it can do and the reasons why versus native visuals. There's just a fun idea from Jayant where, actually I need to click here you go, send. A session sometime might actually on the limitations. So basically it's almost like a flip side in the things that it can't do. I don't know if it'd be a full session, but I think it could be a subtopic within a session. But it's an interesting kind of almost a reverse focus a little bit. So Jen, really good idea. And I definitely, again, I think it would be a good subtopic within a larger conversation of that. But I'm sure I'm going to have many live streams and videos with Daniel in the future on this. But that's something I'm definitely going to make a note of.
Yeah, and it's probably worth, I don't know if you have had a look, but the Mike from Power BI Tips, Mike Carlo, he's done a great series of videos exploring Charticulator in a much deeper dive than we can do here. It's probably about 10 hours worth of videos. Each one has a dedicated section. So we talked about marks and guides and glyphs. He really unpacks those. So if you, I presume you've seen them, but if not, they are worth doing some supplementary research on. because Mike does a lot of, and I've turned up on one of those, but Mike does really good analysis of Charticulator and some of the challenges that he's met with doing things. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Often when you've got a user interface that you're trying to use to build something, you do hit a wall. And what you got to think about is it's like the core visuals. Microsoft are trying to give you something that you can just build with a few clicks, which is great. And that's my preference. I'm a big custom visual fan, but I'm going to choose core visuals where possible because there's less overhead for me to build. I don't want to, I don't immediately want to go, oh, I'll just do that in Charticulator because reasons. But
yeah.
You have the same challenges with Charticulator. It's a user interface. It's trying to give you features and functionality. So by having a user interface in the way, for lack of a better expression, it's good, but you do hit limits. And this is when there are some decisions that have to be made by the authors of the tool that they can't do everything. All I would suggest is that if there are limits, then that GitHub repository we just showed at charticulator.com is where you might ask for things. And the team can consider that. If they don't know that you need something, put it, ask for it, and then they can consider if it can go on the roadmap or if it makes sense. But that's when you step into the coding realm. If you need something that's very, very specific, that's when you have to roll your sleeves up, unfortunately. Anyway, speaking of core visuals, one thing that people really, really love is tables, because tables give us lots of information. So what we have here is we've got a matrix, kind of a table, with country down the left and months of the year across the right. So this is just for 1 year, and we've got the total sales per month. Now, this is something that people like to see because they like to look at the numbers, and this is very handy. But Reed, can you tell me which month had the highest sales and which country was it?
Let me brew some coffee and stare for a bit. Yep. I would say June, Mexico. Did I actually get it?
Ooh, good, but not quite right. But you saw how you had to scan through that, right? You had to read it. Now, 5 seconds is an arbitrary deadline, but when you get a dashboard, you want to focus on things. So, we can make a small change here to make this easier, right? We can take a matrix and we can add conditional formatting to it. How about now? Try it now.
Oh yeah, December, Canada.
Yeah, exactly. Now there's a couple of darker ones, but you can whittle those down mentally, and then you can go, 148. So the context of number plus shading helps us out a lot. So we can do this with a core matrix, which is great. Where's he going? Bear with me. What we can do is we can continue to make changes. So one of the things that's really, really cool is, if you start to then, what we talked about is moving through. So you start with a core visual and then you customize it, and then you start to think about how I can do more things with the data model to bend it to my will. So if we look over here, what we can now do is do what's called optimizing for information density. So what that means is that we want to try and increase the amount of information in the space we have without getting too many distracting elements. So what we've done here is made a few simple changes to make the matrix smaller but more info dense. So what we've done here, and I'm still talking about core visuals, I changed the table theme to simple, so the zebra stripes are gone. I've made the outline color the same as the background to give these white lines between the rows and the columns. I've done the same with the vertical and horizontal grid, which is basically the same thing. Because the currency and the unit sign, the millions and the dollars, are redundant because you don't need them in every row, in every cell. We've just put them up here in the title, $1 million. Now we know when we look at the chart, we just look at numbers and we can go, oh yeah, it's $148 million. I don't need it explicitly stated for me. And the way I did this was I created a measure and divided it by a million. So this requires some knowledge of my data, but this helps my readers much more succinctly. And then I've aligned my row headers so they're on the right-hand side. And what I've done is I've removed the total labels and the row category. So you'll notice this is blank, and this is a hack. So if I click on this, I've been able to make that blank. And I can do that by visiting a site called qwerty.dev. So let's just pop that in. Pretty sure that's it. Just double check. I could have actually just clicked on the link, but I use a different default browser. And I can copy, there's this one called zero width space. So I can click that and copy it to my clipboard. And then I can go in here and, because if I change this to a space, this appears back.
Yep.
And in Power BI, they're very helpfully, but this is something they've missed. So I wouldn't trust this as 100%, reliable. But I can put that hidden character in, and it hides the country column because this is country. I know it's country. I don't need it to tell me. And it's the same with totals. If I read this, I know these are totals. So this is just thinking about core visuals. So you get a little bonus thing today.
Honestly, like I
Things
haven't
you can do now.
actually used that yet. I've done some fancy things with like changing the font color and putting like a period in there and other stuff like that. But the complete removal of it is really nice because it's sometimes you don't want that in there. But unfortunately, unlike Excel, you can't just go in and edit a single cell in any table
Yeah.
or matrix visual.
Yeah, but a good example would be, using calculation groups to do the stuff that you've been demoing on your stream read. They probably weren't intended for that, right? In particular, I know one of the workarounds is you have to turn the visual into a combo chart first, and then turn it back to a line chart. So there's
Popping this
things we
comment in.
find.
Popping this comment in, by the way, it's like that hack alone was worth the price of admission. Like I think that's a pretty ingenious one.
Oh, nice. I have a blog post, cochubo.co on that one, so that unpacks it in a bit more detail. Okay, so this is with a core visual, but let's
It can
move
get better.
across here. Well, that's just to compare. So this is our original one, and this is our new one. So just by doing that, we've got much more room on the canvas, which is really good. But the next question read, which country had the highest total sales and which month had the highest total sales? It's two different data points, but now we're looking at the totals.
Oh yeah, so now you have to get a scan. USA and the other one's a little harder. They're closer together. I think June.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I believe it's December, but let's
Or
find
December.
it.
Yeah, I think so. That one's a little bit higher, 445.
Yeah. Now, people might go, oh, just do the same thing on totals. Well, you can't. And also, if you did, it's going to wreck it for this.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, you're putting another pre-attentive attribute, which is color, on this, that may blur this particular message here.
Yep.
So where I'm going with this, I use Charticulator to produce this. And I got to give Steve Wexler credit for this because I never saw this before. And I just thought, wow, this is just great. This is info-dense stuff. Right? So now we've got...
Interesting.
We call it a matrix. We call it a matrix. So I wouldn't normally recommend Charticulator for building tables and matrices because it doesn't have scrolling, and putting the dynamic sort on the columns and stuff is not something that it can really do. But if I need a very dense piece of information that I'm just going to put on a dashboard that somebody just needs to know, right, bam, how's my year going? I can see, I've got these marginal bars on the totals, but I've also got, this is a length and a height attribute that I can use to gauge the size. So you can try it again, right? So you can see now, you can scan down, 826 is the biggest bar, USA, you're right on that one. I can scan across the bottom, I see the two biggest bars, and I can use the numbers to help me discern it.
I don't say it often, but that's a sexy visual,
Okay, thank you. I like that. Well, how do we do it? Well, first of all, I guess the key thing is we've only got 3 fields. We've got the same thing we used in our other matrix. We've got the country, the month, and the sales. That's all we've got. So how do we do it? Well, this is when we go beyond the dragging a couple of things on the canvas, but it's 3 glyphs, it's 7 marks, 2 guide coordinators, and 1 identical data set, so 1 query, which is, if you were to do this with core visuals, you would have probably the matrix and a bar chart and a column chart. And I think only recently you've been able to do this with column charts, where you have them go the other way. But that's 3 visuals, 3 queries, and you've got to line them up. Fun. So we're not going to produce this exactly because we're going to have a finite amount of time, but I want to talk about this, this 3 glyphs, 3 plot segment, 7 mark thing. So let's add Charticulator to the canvas. And let's pull in those fields, right? So I've got my sales in millions. Wait, there we go. That's right. I've got my country. I would search, but I don't want to. It's probably way more efficient. And in my date table, I've got month. Actually, yeah, that's okay. Month is good.
Now, how
So
easy
let's
is it,
understand.
out of curiosity? Because when you open the Charticulator visual, it has an option to instantly add a template. And then you know drop plop your data right into there. Um, have you submitted any of like these ones as ones that could be part of that marquee of templates that are built into there?
No, I haven't yet because I'm not entirely sure. I think this is really just curated by the team. So these are examples on the website, and you can go to the website, download the templates.
Yeah, yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how that evolves, because I think one of the keys with this and with the Deneb visual as well is how we can use templates to help people streamline their
Yep,
work.
exactly.
So I'm not focusing a lot on, I'm not really talking about templates today because it's more about building blocks, but there isn't, once you import a template, it lets you map your fields to the fields in the template, which is quite cool. But yes, it's we'll see how it goes. I think ultimately, I think this is, I mean, I think Mike at Power BI Tips is really keen on helping this agenda. You know, he sees the success. You know, templates are really the success of this thing. Ultimately,
Yep.
anyway. So let's have a look. So we've got our canvas. We've got three things here. So what we'll do is we'll focus on the big stuff first. Let's drag a mark in. And we can see, oh my God, we've got all these things here because basically these are all the rows in our data set. We've got 60 rows and 3 columns. Now the grain is the month by the country. And this is what you got to think about. Every distinct combination of columns produces rows in Charticulator. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to go and bind country to the y-axis. So now we've got, this is still stacked out because everything's grouped by country now. And let's put month on the x-axis just so that Charticulator knows. Now, Charticulator has some inbuilt logic to sort months, but if you had something that wasn't logical, you would have to, you know, like how Power BI does the sort column for you, you would have to drag in the sort column to help Charticulator out.
Yep.
Because it assumes you want to just go back to basics and do everything. Anyway, so now we've got essentially a matrix, which is really simple. So one thing I'm going to do, and I'll just do this just to show it, is the plot segments now have, let's just reduce that glyph down. The plot segments have an x-axis and a y-axis now with the month and the country bound to them. And there's a gap. So what I'm going to do is reduce this down to 0 so that everything munges together. And with the shape, I'm just going to do, this is more for consistency, is that I'm going to add a stroke to it. And I'm going to put the line width at 2. And what that does is that creates that gap effect, which is quite nice. But we don't have time to focus on every little thing. So let's just go with the shape. We're going to create that conditional shading. I'm going to drag my sales onto the fill. This is one of the cool things now, is that we bind data to attributes. So now we've got, look at that, that's real dark. We know that's the biggest month. Now in here, I can change that slightly. I'm going to change that to blues. And what I can do is I can take colors out of the gradient. So I'm just going to turn it down to that one. The reason being is, and I could do this with time, is that I could, you know, the contrast of black on that blue is not great. And you'd argue it's not great here as well, but let's, you know, I did test out of the visual through the color blindness simulator, and it's actually quite good. But that's the other thing you got to think about with building visuals yourself, is the accessibility of them, which is session in itself. But anyway, we can now see that we've got our color coding, which is great. Let's add a text mark on our glyph. This is one of the challenges with the whole Power BI canvas, is you're kind of constrained in here, but what we can do is we can pop out the glyph and drag it over here. So for now, we'll just pop that there so we've got a bit more space here for demo purposes. So we'll drag that text onto the glyph, and we can now see we've got an arbitrary attribute. We'll just center that using the anchor Y, and we'll drag the sales to the text. And that's 45.4. So what happens now is Charticulator puts an expression in here, which is average sales. And this is more like how Power BI works. Now, because this is a single row, the aggregate doesn't matter because it's only one data point. But if you're, we'll show this in a minute. If you're using grouped up plot segments, you have to think about the aggregate that's being used. And I can click on, I can't do it here because this is a free format field, but some fields actually have a picker that help you. But what I want to do is just over on the end here, there's this number format definition. And again, we can't spend a heap of time on this, but I'm just going to change that to 0.0. and put a comma on the front of it. Now, this is not Power BI formatting. This is a special type of formatting that is used mostly in JavaScript using a library called D3. But trust me for now. So that changes the number to a whole number. So we've pretty much got the matrix. And I could spend a lot of time tidying this up, but I want to fill your head with ideas. So now we've got that, how can we actually do the rest of it? So what we'll do, I'm just going to add in a couple of guides. So the guides we have here are built in, but we can add additional guides. So I'm going to add what we call a guide coordinator, and I'm going to drag it down on the main canvas, and I'm going to snap it to those two guides. So you can see now I've got my green dots. I'm going to give that a count of 6, and that creates more things for us to snap to. I'm going to do the same thing with a horizontal one. Now, normally, I'll show you the full example when we finish, but I normally go and name all these as well. So I'm just going to make that 6 as well, just for the, and we've now got some extra guides here. I'm going to click on this plot segment. I'm going to drag it. I can see that it's telling me where the guides are, right? You can see the 2 orange lines.
Yes.
I've
Sorry, I
now
was responded to a comment.
resizing.
Go ahead.
No, that's absolutely fine. But one thing is that the x-axis, I want that on the top, so I can go down to here, and I can click on position and change it to opposite. So I've now got my months on the top like a matrix. What I can do as well, I'm not going to do all this, but I'll just show you for completeness. Each axis has some additional properties, so I can say change the line color to nothing, and that removes those lines at the top there, just so it looks more like a table heading.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got stuff to do. So now this is a glyph with the data in it. What I can do is I can add a new glyph, and it's going to ask me to create a plot segment. So I can click on plot segments, and I've got an option of a 2-dimensional or a 1-dimensional. The 2-dimensional is the default, but I'm going to drag this out just like a mark. I've now got a new glyph, which is called glyph 1. As I say, I normally name it, but we're going for speed here. I'm going to drag my mark onto the glyph, and oh, look at that. That's almost imperceptible. There's so many rows in there. I want these to go horizontally, so I'm going to stack Y. I can see I've got a little bit more resolution, but this is still, 12 rows per, per country. Jeez, wake up. And I can see that my glyph is very, very tiny. So what I can do with a plot segment is I can group it. So this is when we're thinking in Power BI now. So I can group it by country. And I've now got 5, which is kind of handy. And with this one here, let's just pull that up. The plot segment 2, which is where we were, that gap is 10%. So I'm just going to reduce that down so that it matches the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And that shape there, I'm just going to do the same thing. So this is just to help with the consistency. So I'm going to add that. So stroke is the line around the shape.
Yep.
So it's like a border. And that just creates a bar alongside of it. Now, this is when we start to do some data binding. So I'm going to get the sales, I'm going to drag it to width, and all of a sudden I've got my bars on the end. But what I got to think about here is this is average sales. I want to change that to sum. So this is the thing you got to keep an eye on when you start doing, when you group, you get some really flexible options. I'm using the same data set, but I've got 2 different charts, which is really cool. But I've got to always look at this aggregate. But now I've got the sum.
In general, as a best practice, kind of whatever the aggregation that's being done in the measure, if you're ever unsure, that's typically the one that you're also going to want to do in wherever you're dragging it in here. So like if it's summing, sum. If it's an average, just have it an average. That's the best practice that I've done if I've ever been trying to guess what to do in there.
Absolutely. So we'll have to do the same thing again with sales. We'll drag that to text, and you'll see now that's the average amount. So that's going to help us with context. I'll change that to sum. He says, let's just type it. We've got lots to do. And I'm changing that again as well. Now we've got the sales, so this is so far we're up to 6 marks, which is quite good. We're going to repeat for the bottom now. We're going to add a new glyph, add a plot segment, drag it in. This one's going to stay as X because it goes along here. We'll drag our mark in. We're going to group this time by month. And we'll change, we'll change the gap to 0 again. We'll choose our shape. So practice makes perfect. And one thing that's a bit annoying is you have to repeat a lot of stuff. The copy paste in here, I don't think is a thing. I'm hoping that might change over time.
Interesting. So copy paste just for text doesn't actually work.
Oh, we can copy paste text, but we can't copy paste elements.
The elements, yeah.
I would like.
That's true.
I would like that very much. I might raise an issue for that. So now with sales, we'll bind that to the height rather than the width because we're going vertically. And again, we'll check that average, make sure it's a sum. There we go. Now, what you'll immediately notice is this is the wrong way. Now, what might be tempting is to try and think, oh, I need to drag this up here. That doesn't work because you're just binding the actual height. The plot segment is x-axis, y-axis. Now, you might also think I can reverse drag out the plot segment the other way, which I've done. Doesn't work very well. In addition to the layout, we've actually got alignment options. So we can actually tell it to align the glyph to the top. And there we go. It's just jumped straight up. And we'll just do the same thing with the text. I'm going to drag that down to the bottom. I'm going to add my sales. Make sure it's a sum. And just change that to 0.0. Done. The seventh mark that we alluded to is the total. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a text mark on the canvas. Now, this is when it's like Power BI. So it aggregates in groups at the total level. So I'm just going to change that to snap there. I'm going to drag the sales into the text. That's 59.5 because it's the average. Put the sum in. 0.0. Done. And we might make that a bit bigger. Just because. But now we can see we've got a very basic matrix with marginal bars. So we've got 1, 2, 3 glyphs and plot segments, 2 marks on this glyph, 2 marks on this glyph, and 2 marks on this glyph with another mark here. 7 marks. Important, save. Now, sometimes when you save, it does a whole bunch of recalculations because it has these things called scales. And scales are used to bind things like fill and data attributes, which we'll see soon in more detail, but for now, just trust me. So we'll hit save again, and the little exclamation mark goes away. Now, if you don't save, it does prompt you when you navigate away, but it's just good practice. So back to the report. And it is there, but it is not perhaps how we want it to be. The reason is that, core visuals, you resize them, they stretch and they fit. There's a lot of logic in there that Microsoft have written to make that nice for you. With Charticulator, visuals are bespoke for you. So what you sometimes have to do is think about the aspect ratio of where you are. So if I want it to be more of an oblong, I can re-edit my visual. And what I can do is I can get the canvas and I can drag it to fit that aspect ratio. And it will just stretch right down. So this may not be perfect, but just to show you, it now fills the box a bit more.
I like it.
So this is just one thing to think about. Okay, so that's our version, and let's just have a quick look in here because we have a lot to do. Actually, I don't know how you're doing for time, Reed, but
let's give it another say 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, so I've done a lot of time on this one. I've named everything nicely. I've put prefixes in. I can change the fonts and everything else. So there's lots of effort you can put in here.
And what you've done too is, like, in general, best practice for anything, whether or not it's the selection pane in Power BI, bookmarks, everything should get a friendly name, because when you come back later, and especially like looking in the settings and all that, you want to make sure that it's easy to figure out what you need to adjust. So it's I very much appreciate it whenever I see somebody taking the extra effort to make sure that it's not just glyph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Think about yourself in a few months' time. You're going to have to come back and think about what past you would do to future you if they knew what you were doing. That's generally how
pretty much.
Because there's so many times I come back to things and I would like, man, if I could go back and punch that guy, I would. Anyway.
It's a great quick question that I'm just going to pop up. Can you copy this visual and then create another one and modify it? So essentially like copy the visual within Power BI. Yeah. So 100%.
Absolutely. So the visual spec is bound to the visual itself. So it's actually a property. So all that stuff that goes in there is a property, just like text or font, but it's way more sophisticated. So I can copy that visual and I can paste it. And I've got basically exactly the same visual. And I can just jump straight in there. So yes, absolutely. And that's now a totally different visual, completely separate. I could change the scale on here to oranges, which is also another nice choice, by the way. I was wavering on orange versus blue. But there you go. So 2 different visuals, same spec. Now they're totally different. So if you edit this one, you saw what happened. So that's the only thing. That's why templates are good.
Okay. I agree.
Now that was basically just raw stuff. When we start putting measures in, this is when it gets really cool. So what I want to try and do is, we'll see how we go for time. If we don't get to demonstrate these, I'll give you a preview of the visuals that we've done. Here's a regular bar chart. Now this is 6 products. You might have 20 or 30. And one of the common challenges with dashboards is you don't want to have a bar chart with 30 series taking up space because it's hard for people to read and dissect. So one of the nice things is, one of the nice features you can do within dashboards is you could make a chart that maybe has, say, the top 3 and groups the others into an others category. Now, I don't know if you saw, Reed, but I saw the other week that Alberto did a really good post on how to model this in to a matrix so that you can, you have to create extra tables and you have to create measures that work all this stuff out so that when they get dragged into a matrix, they calculate. Mm-hmm. We didn't do that here. We did something a bit simpler, which is quite handy. So how did we do that? Well, actually, let's just show off a little bit more. I've got a parameter here, and if I change my top end to 2, the chart can recalculate. If I change it to 1, then it just shows me Paseo and all the others. So I can give my users some control, or I can hide this away and make it fixed by a measure. But how I did that? Well, this is a what if parameter. So we just add this, and this is the value of that parameter, right? So if I change this to 2, this is just a simple parameter. So what we've done is we've created 3 extra measures, and because the grain is really important here, right? We're not dragging with core visuals. We have to drag the columns and measures we want to visualize. With Charticulator, we drag the data we want to visualize and work it out afterwards. So what I can do is I've got my 6 rows, and this is exactly the same data set, by the way. I've got my sales for each one, but what I've done is I've created let's look at that product sales rank, and small plug for Tabular Editor 3. Just been released this week. Absolutely fantastic. Simple ranking measure. So based on sales, where does my product fit? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Easy.
Yep.
Then I've created 2 extra measures, product group and product group sort. So if we look at product group, we just look at the current product, work out the current top end value, and if it's less than the top number, less than or equal to the top number, we've got another measure here that hard codes the all others, which I did put in here, but I like to abstract things away, which is not great for demoing. Simply use the normal current product value if it's below that top end, and if it's not, show all others, which is what we've got here.
Okay.
And then I've got an arbitrary sort column here, which is what we need to get this effect where the others are at the bottom. Otherwise, Charticulator would put it between Paseo and VTT. So this is just another variance of that other measure, where if it's the other value, then make it a really high number. Otherwise, use the rank. Now, realistically, we're not going to have 9 products in our table because Power BI won't like that. But this is just something that I can use to make sure that it's totally separate. So how we did that, again, you can see we've got product group, product for the grain, product group, sales millions, product group sort. Now, because of time, I'm just going to open the existing one and show you what we did. So what we can see in here is the data set is all 6 rows. But what we do, that trick that we just saw with the plot segment, we group it by product group. And that creates 3 glyphs on the canvas. And what you can see is one of the nice features is, I'll just show you because I've got time, because I'm not going to unpack this too much. I've actually fixed the height to 30 pixels here. If I turn this off, it stretches it. If I go back to if I save and go back, with that, if I do this, it's going to change the height of the bars each time I change my top end. So I've got now 2 really thick bars. But if I actually fix the height to something that makes sense for the user, the chart will grow and shrink. But you've got to watch that. You've got to watch that situation we talked about where it doesn't scroll. So it will just go off the bottom currently and not give you a scroll bar. So that's just something we've got to look at. But this one was quite simple. It was just basically the bar's got the width of the sum of sales. We've got a label for the amount.
Exactly.
We've got a label for the country group. And we've just done that with a couple of measures. And we've now got dynamic top end that we can, this is only a small number, but if you think you have 20 products and 15 of them are just not contributing much, you want to group those up. And this is good for, some people may lynch me for this, but this is actually a good scenario for a pie chart, where you might have top 1. So you've got the products you want to look at and everything else, where you want to see that part of a whole. This is actually one of the very, very few scenarios where a pie chart is valid. But this is how you can do it. And those radial charts in Charticulator, I'm not going to do it now, but because, like I say, I might get lynched. But that's actually a very valid scenario. So that's just a quick one. The one I really want to unpack, because it's different, is lines. So this is a core chart. And the one thing I don't like is how I have this legend that's disconnected. So what I generally tend to do with a line chart is I will turn the title off and I will use the legend for the title so that I've got some compactness here. But wouldn't it be really cool if we could do something a little more in line? So this is an example where I've got a line chart done in Charticulator, where I've put the labels on the end of the series. And how I did that with measures. So again, we think about our data set. We've got a month and we've got a country. So what I've got is I've got my sales amount. And what I've done is I've got a measure that just says, is it the last month? And we can see that's yes for each country by date. So let's have a look at that as last month measure, because it's really simple. There it is.
Beautiful.
So all I do is I get the latest date. And if the current date, which I use month start as my snapping month, snap everything to the first of the month if I'm looking monthly, then it's a yes or a no. So I simply have a yes or a no value to work on. And I'm just going to spend a bit of time building this one, if that's all right, because I want to show people how to do lines.
Yep.
This is something I don't think we did last.
I have a quick question from Fernando. Really nice with the top end trick. How did you manage to sort the all others at the bottom?
That was using the, come on, son, the group sort. Perfect. So if we go in here, hopefully, let's go down to the plot segment, group by product. It's actually in the, no, that's not it. Water? Where is it? It's bound to group sort. There you go. So in the plot segment sub layout, I can change that to sort by different things. So if I do it by sales, it jumps around, you see? But if I use that product group sort, it will push it to the bottom. So go nuts, everybody. Anyway, so with this chart, all we need is those 4 attributes. So much like we had before, we've got our sales in millions. Because I like that, those non-redundant measures. In my design DAX table, I've got my is last month, which at the minute will say yes. And let's just drag my columns in. So in date, I've got month. And in my demographic, I've got country short. Because that is not cool. Oh, well, let's fix that. This is what happens when you're not looking at the prize, guys. Drag a table, change it to Charticulator. This is one of the lovely things about the swapping of values across to other visuals. It doesn't always work 100%. That's okay. Let's go ahead and edit. So let's just double check the data set because I got a bit waylaid there. Create chart. Now we'll check the data set. Because if it's not right, now's the time to fix it. So yeah, sales month is last month. Yes, Canada, France, Germany, USA. Great. So the way we're going to do this one is, well, firstly, so lines are different. We drag a symbol, which is like an anchor point, right? So we've got all of our glyphs. We are going to drag our month to the x-axis because we've got a line chart that's by time. We are going to, because you've got shapes and symbols. Symbol is anchored to the center of the glyph. So what we can do with that one is we can do what people may expect, and we can drag the y-axis so that everything's where it should be. Now, that's a bit of a naughty y-axis.
Well described.
0. Actually, it's okay with line charts as long as it's contextual. So this would have been all right, but anyway, long story. Now, with axes, because Charticulator was always designed to be used on static images. So now we're in Power BI. There's the option, data changes. So what you want to do is if you've manually set that range, you want to turn off auto range for minimum. Otherwise, it'll just set it back to 10 next time. But we've got to think is that 150 may change. So we want to leave that to calculate itself as we slice our data. So that's another little free tip there. Now we've got, oh, hang on, sales is the wrong one. Let's use year-to-date sales. Sorry.
No worries.
Year-to-date sales was the one I wanted. I knew something didn't feel right. I've got a millions for that as well. But you'll see what happens now if I remove a measure that I didn't intend to use. If I'm using it, Charticulator will tell me, hey, you were using this. What do you want to map it to? So I can just choose the measure, which is really cool. So I obviously deliberately intended to do that. That's what I was expecting. So now I can see that I've got my trend here. This is a lovely scatter chart, but what we want to do is make it a line chart. So the way we do that is we click on the symbol, and there's this option up here called links. Now we talked about links being data-driven, but we're not going to do that. We're going to just connect them up. So we can use a line, and we're going to use country to connect them. So if we create the links here, we've now got lines. Now, your question earlier about could lines be colored differently between points is yes, they could. So I'll demonstrate that really quickly. So what we would do normally is we would drag country to the fill. So we've got a fill color for each country. I'm just going to bump that width up to 3 so we can see that we've got different colors, right? Now what we'll do is we'll hide that symbol because it's used as an anchor. So this color, if I bound the link color to month, I can have a different color per segment. And this is because Charticulator renders individual lines per point. Now this is not efficient, but it gives you flexibility. Now with most visuals, including if you build one completely from scratch, the trick is I'll just use a single SVG line. Now, when you do that, SVG doesn't really have the ability for you to color parts of the line. You have to draw new lines. So you connect lots of lines up. So you can do different colors. So you could make these conditional based on a measure like we'll see in a minute with the series line. But what I don't think you can do is bind the type. I don't think that's available. Yeah, I can't drag anything maybe it does. No, it's not data bound. So if that were data bound, you could, but you might be able to use the techniques I'm going to show you to sort that out. So let's just get that back to how it was. Now, one thing I did with the symbol was I hid it, but I actually want to show it because what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the country to the color of that as well. And what happens is we have scales, right? Scales are used to bind colors and attributes. And what Charticulator has done is it's put the color under both this scale. So the link and the symbol both use the same color palette. So if I change France to this lovely salmon color, you'll see that both the point and the line change. So that's a way that it keeps things in sync. Now you can force it to do it, which is too advanced for today, but it's in the documentation. But I don't want to show this point every time. So on my symbol, there's a visibility. Now I'm going to drag that is last month, and it's still there because I need to click on that and remove the N. And now I've just got a point on the end. Now, what I'm going to point out is your data has to exist in the data set for these options to be visible. I've got a ticket in, I've got an issue in with the team to ask if we can create predefined scales that, because if the data is not in the data set, it doesn't always work. And what we'll tease at the end is very much susceptible to that. And you have to be very careful when you design your visual that the data still remains, that all the distinct values remain, otherwise it gets lost, which is a bit of a bug, but it's hopefully getting worked on. We do the same trick here with we put a text mark, and oh, look at that, we've got labels on every data point, which is not ideal. But I can use the same trick. I'm actually just going to do the color again. All under here, very nice. Visibility, same thing, conditioned by last month. And you can see that the visible is all under the same scale as well.
Yep.
So if I turn that off, I get my text and my point again. But now I've got my series label, and go to my text mark and drag my country in. Bam, done.
I like that.
Got a nice, I like this as well. This is my biggest gripe with the line chart. But yeah. So when it does become difficult is when we don't get the aspect ratio correct. The other issue we have is, and I'll just show you with a slicer, is if we add in our missing one, I've left that out deliberately, is it creates this nasty overlap, which is not something that we can ideally do much about. So we can, but we have to start thinking a bit differently, which we've got over the page. So what I've done here is I call this heuristics, but it's not really heuristics. What I've done is I've changed things a little bit to offset the label. So we've now got everything in, but we've given the labels a bit more space.
Yep.
And this is really simple because all I've done is I've introduced one additional measure. Well, label position bottom or top. And what I've done is I've done this on a rank. So if I sort this the right way, this is a simple is odd, is even. So if I look at, let's just get that tabular editor up.
People are loving the visuals, by the way.
Oh, nice. We've got one for top and one for bottom. Just, if it's odd, it's on the top. If it's not odd, it's on the bottom. So we just flag them as yes or no accordingly. And how we do this, because I'm pushed for time, is I'll just open this up and show you. It's a similar trick, just with two text marks. So let's turn those. Let's turn those on. Oh yeah, that's a bug that's getting fixed. That's the wrong one. Text label above. Yeah, anyway, if I turn those on, you can see that there's actually two labels on the end. So this is just a similar trick where I've got two text marks and I set the visibility based on those, whether it's label above or label below. You could also do it with the text. You could just make blank text or not. This is the thing with flexibility. You can do whatever the hell you like to a degree, which is quite good. So I can't dwell too much, but it's the same principle. I'm just building on it.
Mhm.
I'm just adding, so just simple collision detection. But you could use whatever DAX you like. This is when DAX and Charticulator become really powerful. This one is nice. I like
I was
this.
just gonna say like it just services so many needs. I love this one too. I think Parker Stevens actually did like somebody within the last 6 months did like a video like where you could highlight different visuals. Basically, and I'm assuming it's essentially controlling the formatting by the slicer selection.
Quite possibly. The thing with doing that option, I think, is that all the data colors are conditionally formatted, and each one has to have conditional formatting. So when the number of categories changes, it gets quite tricky.
Yeah.
So we might want the ability to highlight. This changes the font size and changes the thickness and color of the line. I'm keeping the color the same because we can't quite data drive colors yet, which is a shame. I'm hoping that'll sort out soon. Well, what I say is we can data drive colors based on a distinct value. We can't pass in a color code, which would be lovely.
Yeah.
But how we did this was, the standard trick of having a disconnected table, and then let me just pull up the table here. Now I've left some things out, but again, country sales rank, position top and bottom for the label. This determines if the value is selected or not, and I've just got a YN flag based on that. So we'll see if we change to Germany, this changes to a Y. Is it the selected country last month, which means that it will show it on the end of the point. And then we've got these ones which are line width and font size. So what I can do is open this up and just quickly show you that you can, on these labels, see if I can make it a bit bigger. This is when it gets a bit harder to show you within a bigger blown up screen. We can actually bind visibility, but also, come on, size, there you go.
Pretty much
So
almost anything that you see that I've experienced so far that you see the gear icon next to, outside of I think like actual font name, has an option to basically to have data pushed into there to configure it.
That's right. So one of the cool things is, I don't know if I'm able to get this to work with the current window issues, which is a bit of a shame. It works a bit better if you've got more room on your screen. Nah, there you go. With the scale, when it's a number, you actually get, it's linear. So think of it like an X or Y axis that has linear values. So you could pass in a font value, but you can actually use the range to change it. So let's just say right now we've got 8 and 14. The measure value is actually, it's 8 or 18. But what I can do is I can actually change that in here to be like, 24.
Yep.
And it will think of it as a gradient. It'll use the gradient to scale the font based on the measure. So you can actually fine tune it within the visual, which is quite cool. And I did that with this other version of it, which I'll just show you, which is more of a kind of, I like this. This is nice and compact. So what I've done here is I've used a single digit month, and I've just put a little line in to indicate the 0, and I've taken the y-axis off. And because I've put the data point, the number on the data point, so this text value here on the end, we can click on it, and as it changes, it shows the actual amount. So we can see this relative to the other series, but we don't need the y-axis because we get the sense of scale from the position of the glyphs, which is quite cool. So you can actually start to think about how to reduce clutter on your charts. And this single digit month works because the grain is at the month level. So because we can pass in a data set, always think about the data you pass in using a table visual. If you can mock it up and it looks right in a table, it'll work in Charticulator. So I've got my month here, which is my distinct value, and I can use a single letter because Power BI won't group it because it's using the month to group it. So you can actually do some really compact stuff.
I like things that can be compacted because, I used to make the joke that space on a Power BI report was like water in California, though they've technically exited a drought since then. But in overall, you want to maximize the real estate as much as you can without making it cluttered too. But you only have so much canvas to work with. So the more information that you can squeeze into a smaller space while still making it clear and concise and not cluttered is like, it's always a goalpost to aim towards.
Yeah, info density is really, really good without the junk around it. So all the relevant stuff.
I have a good,
but yeah,
go ahead. I was just going to also say there was a question from Udi that, and maybe, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, is this PBAX file available anywhere?
But then you will have access to all my secrets. I can make it. I'll talk to Reed after this, and I'll make a link available. But yes,
Perfect.
I can make this. I'm going to take one out though before I do, and that's because we will do a different session. But I'm going to show you this one because this is, Reed asked me so nicely. So this is what I call the final boss of measures, right?
We made it to the final boss level.
This is a single visual.
Yep.
With a single data set. What I really like about this is we've been able to dynamically color the circles and label them and position labels. So these are all based on the techniques we've seen. I've got coloring. I've got a summary, and I've got a series. So this is, if I click on, say, Germany, then I can see that because my high point is off, my end point is now there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got this low point is underneath. But if I start to look in the product level, I've actually moved the label above because it's relatively flat. And if I click on this one, then it's because it's less than 1 million, but more than 0. I've actually put a single decimal place in versus these others. And I've actually put it off to the right here because these sales have more room than this side. And if I move to here, I've put it on the left because the incline is sharper than it is this side. Yeah. So I've been able to actually start producing. That one is, I think we definitely have to cover that in a different session.
I think my goal for this is to have a couple of videos that are dedicated to, because Ruth's done some of that. I'm going to take inspiration over from Kerbal, is having a video that's like, here's how to build this visual specifically in Power BI. So I think for the people tuning in, that's a great teaser, and I'm planning to work with you, Daniel, and basically we'll record a pre-recorded session that will get uploaded as one of my Tuesday videos that will be a walkthrough of how to build that. Because I got inspired, again, from like a LinkedIn post from somebody where like they built this in Excel, and man, that'd be great if I could have a custom visual that does this, because building that in Power BI is possible, but you're going to have to, add a bunch of cards and things together, group them. You can make it, but then you have 5 visuals on the page. It renders more slowly versus why not just have a single custom visual that does that? There's 4 to 5x speed improvement to having them render when you open the browser.
Yep, absolutely. But this is a single data set. There's a lot of measures in here. But just to tease you, here's the table with, I use this to test everything, right? So if I've got my data points that indicate the positions. I've got my indicators so that, if we look at if we slide this around, this just changes the months. So I'm up to August. I've got my red versus green, and these red and green are colorblind friendly, at least to a degree. They've got a slight blue tint to them, so they do actually show up a bit more nicely. That's another Steve Wexler hint.
Yep.
From the big picture. So if you want to use red and green, there are ways of subtly changing the hues of them slightly so that they do still look that way. But also because this is a high and a low value, the position indicates high and low, so it's not always essential that the color has to be exactly right. I could just make those solid colors and it wouldn't really matter. But that's probably we'll definitely do this in a different session because it was hell of fun to build. I'm not even kidding. I was going to do a Sankey chart today, and I saw that Ruth from Kerbal had done one. And I thought, and then Reed and I were talking last week, and I thought, this sounds like such an awesome challenge. But yeah, so we've got a nice compact card, single query, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all these data points, all done in a single query. I think I'm peace out for now. I think I'm very happy to.
But otherwise, like that, I have a couple of questions. That is something that I think myself and a lot of people in here are included is going to be really fun to do as a follow-up video. And I'm hoping to do quite a few series, either with you or also just building some out myself. But it's really just giving real-world examples of like, here's a very practical visual that you can build in Power BI. One that probably used to require layering, and now you can just do it in a single visual and have it like look just as beautiful as you've done with that one. I do have a few
Oh yeah,
questions that I'm going to pass over to you. Let's see.
sure thing.
So another one from Udi. They may or may not be on, but they'll still be good to answer. Does the Charticulator honor the any custom Power BI themes versus, I guess, having to configure, kind of from within?
I'm going to say for now. It sort of does. And this is probably one, if you go to Mike Colo illustrates it better than I probably could. His first video, actually, where he starts to just unpack or unbox the visual, he starts to show some challenges with the themes currently. So what it will do is it will auto-assign the colors based on the current theme. But if you start changing the theme, it doesn't always work. And I think what we've got to bear in mind is this is a public preview. It's the feat to just get it working in Power BI is, I'm not going to lie, I've thought about it before. As a visual developer, I've thought about, could I put it in? And I just gave up because I thought that it just can't be done. So the fact that it's even inside Power BI to begin with is great. But I would hope that this stuff, there's going to be changes, there's going to be improvements. What I would say is the more people use it, the more stuff we find, the more stuff they know about. You've got an opportunity to get in at the ground floor here. This is a fantastic visual.
Exactly.
And it's got a long way to go, but man, it's so much fun. And you can see we can do real stuff with it. It's not just like making a circular bar chart or making some really esoteric. It's great for esoteric visuals, but this is a real storytelling application here. But if you get these principles right, you can start to build some incredibly unique visuals.
I agree, and I think it allows you to meet a lot of client needs that are not being met by the native visuals or any of the visuals from the custom store, but without having to, say, pay a developer to build a custom visual from scratch for thousands of dollars at least.
That's right. Oh, seriously, I don't do a lot of private visual development because it's quite expensive. People are quite surprised when I tell them how much effort it is to build a custom visual from scratch, even with the level of experience I have, because it's just so specific to them. This is a great. I actually, even when I develop custom visuals, I use Charticulator as a prototyping tool because it helps me to get things figured out before I even start, even writing code sometimes, just depending on what I'm trying to do.
Exactly.
So there's so many applications for it.
One other question.
Absolutely. You do. Oh yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, just one other question, and then I think we'll wrap up for time. But this is a really, really good one. Somebody was asking about a native waterfall chart, and I was asking the difference between the native waterfall and this one. And I've seen a lot of people ask for that. They actually want a grand total, basically like a path tracker, start to end, with the beginning total, end total, and then the delta between the two. And without having to make a custom disconnected table, or you have to do some modeling tricks in Power BI to do that. It is possible, but it's hard to natively get that to fit in a native waterfall chart. But do you kind of understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you basically want, let's just say for this year.
Yep.
You've got January and you've got December, and the total at the start of January and the total at the end of December are two distinct data points, and you want to show the month. You want to show the months in between.
Exactly.
The short answer is I'll have to think about it. The longer answer is I think with some compromises it can be done. I guess I'd have to figure out in my head what you imagine it to look like. So if you could imagine a waterfall chart that didn't have lines connecting the data points, so they're arranged bars, that could probably work because you'd have maybe three plot segments and glyphs. You'd have a plot segment that groups each total. You'd make those measures that are across each row. So I guess a good example would be if I just turn on one of my design measures that I use to help these flags. Kpi Card. Oh, hang on, it's in sales. This is one of the fun parts about building stuff. I've got my max month and min-month sales. So let's just take out some of these other things. So this is the same across, just got to catch up, sorry. Oh, I deleted them. How wonderful. So for each row, I've got a measure that tells me the high and the low sales across the whole range. So what you would probably have is a measure that gives you the starting value that goes all the way down, and a measure that gives you the ending value that goes all the way down. so that you've got the same data set, but then when you create a chart, you have 3 glyphs. The first glyph will use the start value, and you'll group it. So without getting too much into the details, in this card, we actually use an aggregate. So when we did the, this is a grouped plot segment, and this is a plot segment that has all the glyphs on it. This uses a last aggregate. So you can actually use a first and a last aggregate to get the right values, which could work too. And then you would use a first aggregate and a last aggregate, and then in here you'd have ranged bars, and you'd have to have measures for start and end, and you would bind those to a data axis so that the bar moves based on the values. But yes, it could be. I think you could get pretty far with it. What might be difficult is let's just see because I don't use waterfall charts very much, but if you wanted something like, let's just drag month on here. This is going to be terrible. If you wanted a line between them, that's probably going to be difficult. You could do this. You might be able to do it. It would be a line for the glyph, and then you'd have to hope that you don't get a bit of white space between them where they line up. But yeah, you could. I think you could do it. It's
good to know. It might actually be it might be a good opportunity for even a follow-up photo to build that out at some point.
Yeah, I do. I'm intrigued by the idea. Actually, I've put way too much prep. I have to admit, prepping for this was. I mean, it's usually fun to prep for stuff, but this was a lot of fun. That's my scratch pad with lots of false starts on. So honestly, it's there's so many different ways to approach things. It's like DAX, right? If there's so many different ways to do measures, there's probably good ways and there's probably bad ways, and there's ways that are equally the same. But everyone's got a different thought process. It's the same with developing custom visuals. The code possibilities are just incredible. So smarter minds than me, more creative minds than me will probably figure it out. My aim here is to empower, for sure. But this is the tip of the iceberg with what I hope people will be able to do. Just using measures to do stuff is great. Data-driven glyph positioning and all kinds of stuff. You can see the kind of things we can do. So there'll be people that will just take this and run with it, I'm sure.
Exactly.
And I'd love to see what they can do.
And I for people again tuning in, we'll have a follow-up video soon that will walk you through the detail of how to make this card that I'll do with Daniel. But otherwise, thanks for showing everything we did today. I think we saw a lot of really cool practical examples. And I think you did a really good job of building out kind of incrementally, starting piece by piece to really show the process for it, but also it gives a good understanding again of the fundamentals of the glyphs and everything else that goes into Charticulator as far as the elements to really build it out component by component. And lots of people in the chat are super happy with everything that they've seen today. So
that's fantastic.
Well, cheers again for you just for doing all this stuff. So I appreciate that.
Got some ticker tape there. That's awesome. But no, I mean, seriously, if I could just say one thing, and this is what I tell myself, tell my former self, the marks, understanding the marks and the grain and the glyphs is really important. You may have a preconceived idea in mind of what chart you need, but you've got to think visually. It's a different way of thinking, but it's going to unlock so much potential for you as an analyst for sure.
Perfect. Daniel, again, thanks for coming on. And otherwise, for everybody else, they'll see both of us soon. But yeah, have a good rest of your morning, whether or not that's actually getting up now or going back and taking a nap. But either way, this has been fantastic. And everybody, thanks for tuning in. This has been great.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fantastic. And I always love to talk about this stuff. So yeah, thanks Reed for the opportunity. Had a fantastic time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.